Hello, everyone. I am happy to have you on this call number 3 of our series. So since we don't have any hand raises yet, I got some email questions that were sent in. And this one here, actually, Steve, is a question that I think is right up your alley to begin with. So it goes. I have noticed some backlash on meditation practices in the current climate of heightened anxiety, fear, and sadness. The criticism being that sitting in stillness with all that is arising for some people can trigger a traumatic response. What is your view on meditation or starting a meditation practice in this current environment? Are there certain meditation practices you would not recommend for people who are highly anxious or dealing with complex emotions? So that's question number 1 here.
Yes, right. That's interesting. When we think about meditation, as an example, I think we can think of 3 different ways of accelerating one's practice. Let's take it out of a pandemic situation. And those 3 ways would be frequency, duration, and intensity. Frequency is how often you do it. Duration is how long you do it. And intensity, well, let's deal with intensity at the end because that's to do with the pandemic. So in a regular situation, somebody might say, I want to increase my meditation practice. So you could say, well, increase the frequency. If you're doing some in the morning, maybe add a little bit in the evening. Do it more often. On retreat, of course, you do much more often, several sits throughout the day. When you talk about duration, you do it for longer. So if you're doing 10 minutes and you want to increase it, accelerate it somehow, go to 15 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever is the case. And when we think of intensity, there's all sorts of intensifiers that we could choose. And certainly, I think, depending on your point of view, a pandemic is a good intensifier. Any stressful situation could be seen that way. It depends on your relationship to it. So it's a little bit like weight training or fitness in general. If you're in the gym doing your bench press, you can do more bench presses. You can take longer to do each bench press, that's time under tension. Or you can increase the weight on the bar, that's intensity. And so I think a pandemic is a little bit like increasing the weight on the bar. It's not voluntary. It could be the case that when you sit down to do your meditation, it's a lot more intense than it normally is because the situation is more intense than it normally is. At least that's how it's perceived. So naturally, yeah, I think it's quite common that one might find one's meditation practice shrinks. Maybe before you're sitting half an hour, you can only do 10 minutes or 5 minutes. I think that's fine because you've got so much more weight on the bar, you don't need to do as long. You get more bang for your meditation buck, you could say. That's one way of saying it. And the other thing to say is that when you sit down to meditate, one expects, I think a lot of people expect to be calm and relaxed. That's one of the reasons we meditate, I think, is a lot of people is to feel calm and calm down. And it can have that effect. But another effect that can happen is suddenly you're actually feeling what's under the surface. So if there's a lot of anxiety or fear or concern there, then when you meditate, probably the case is, it's not like it's making you more anxious, but in a way you're getting in touch with the fear or negative emotion that was actually under the surface, that maybe was kept out of your main conscious awareness by working and doing things, prepping, whatever, the important things, Netflix or whatever. So when you sit down to meditate, sometimes you can feel the anxiety or the negative emotion that was actually under there the whole time. Sometimes I compare that to a Kiss concert. If you go to a Kiss concert, then of course Kiss is there on the stage, right? I think we've all probably been to several Kiss concerts. I expect most people here attend each and every one of their local concerts, and I would advise that. But anyway, you go to a Kiss concert, and I see some comments here. Some people are talking trash about Kiss. How dare you? But anyway, you go to a Kiss concert and they're very loud. You have your friend with you and your friend is talking to you, but you can't hear your friend because Kiss is drowning out the friend. And of course, if you then leave with your friend and go to a nearby library, the friend is talking at the same volume and suddenly you can hear what they're saying. They may even be startlingly loud, actually. And that's because the sort of ambient noise level, the KISS concert, you've left the KISS concert, and now all the sorts of sounds that were beneath the level of the KISS concert are suddenly available to be perceived. They were always going on, but now you can perceive them. That's also why sometimes when you meditate, you feel suddenly very tired. Very often, I think that's because one of the reasons that can be is because you were actually quite tired. And when you suddenly stop to feel it, you know, my mother used to say, well, you're tired because you stopped. So I think it's absolutely the case that sitting down to meditate can bring up negative emotion. It's not guaranteed to be some sort of a pleasant experience. So the question, I think, was something like, what to do about that? Well, I'd say three things. First of all, if you want to maintain your meditation practice, it's okay to do less. You can have a golden through line of consistency in your practice, but you do not have to maintain the quantity or quality of your previous practice that was there in the fair times, because this is not a fair time. It's a stressful time for a lot of people. So it's okay if your practice shrinks down a bit. In fact, you have to be flexible and allow it often sometimes to shrink down. If you're used to doing half an hour and you can't do half an hour, you can only do 5 minutes. Some people think that means they're going backwards, but it's not the case. It doesn't work that way. The weight on the bar is heavier. You don't need to do as long. You don't need to do as many reps. Do what you can do. If the choice is 5 minutes or aiming for the half an hour and not doing it at all, then of course that's a choice between 0 and 5. So doing, I think, less, perfectly okay. That's one strategy. And also to understand that it's quite natural for that to happen. And then I think the part of the question was, what techniques would I recommend?
That you would not recommend?
Well, I mean, that really depends on the person. It depends on the person. Generally, the meditation technique you're most comfortable with is the one that has the stress tolerance for the difficult material that comes up, whether it's internal or external. So, I mean, generally, the best technique is the one that you're most used to. But something that would be interesting to try is a bit of walking meditation. And why is that? Well, you know, you don't have to sit still to meditate. You can lay down, the traditional 4 postures of meditation are laying down, sitting, standing in place, or walking. But you could walk, do your walking meditation, pace around the apartment, or some of us are allowed to go out for a daily walk in whichever district we're in. So go out for your daily walk and you can apply your meditation technique during that walk. And then you have both the benefit of a bit of movement as well as your meditation technique. So I would say those are some immediate thoughts that come to mind. There is a bit of a problem when people recommend meditation as some sort of blanket cure-all or a panacea or a tranquilizer or an anesthetizer. Sometimes meditation is a sensitizer or it's an uncoverer, and you will be able to feel what you're feeling more. The ideal, of course, is maximum poignancy, minimum problem, to quote Shinzen once again. In meditation, you know, where you're like a circuit with low resistance. If you're an electrical circuit, if you imagine that, then high resistance, you put the electricity through it, it produces all this heat and light. That's the sort of suffering. But on the other hand, if you can be a low resistance, high efficiency, high conductivity circuit, you can put an awful lot of electricity through a circuit like that, and it sort of cleanly and efficiently is able to pass through. So that's something to work towards. But anyway, yeah, it's difficult circumstances do make things like meditation more tricky. So I think it's a very interesting question.
Thank you. We have Helen, who has a question. So Helen, I'm going to unmute you, and now we should be able to hear you. Oh, good.
Hi.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. First of all, thank you for having these, Michaela and Steve. I'm relatively new, Michaela, to your work. I started reading The Wild Woman's Way maybe a month before all of this started. I watched your YouTube video with Gwyneth Paltrow and Brad Falchuk yesterday, which was really helpful because I'm in partnership and we're just learning a lot of different things about each other right now. And I feel like situations like these magnify a lot. So I think I look at it as a good opportunity for us. I think that the question I have, let's see how this comes out. One of the things that I'm realizing is that I only have so much energy to feel what's going on. And right now it's like, and I've been able to be good about like the energy when it's just unnecessary drama or, you know, toxic energy, like I can set those boundaries there. And right now though, the suffering that's happening is just so extensive, you know, just in the world and just like factually, you know, just the things that are happening to people and what people are having to go through. And I'm realizing that I can't take it all in, because if I take it all in, I can't move. Like I can't, you know, and I have to function. I have a job and, you know, we just have things that I need to do. And so I'm trying to figure out my tools to use during this time. You know, I'm limiting how much I'm consuming from the news and social media. I'm focusing, you know, on like facts and just kind of, you know, just trying to like not take things so seriously, because I think laughter, fun, joy, you know, presence and what we're grateful for is important. And so, and I'm, you know, I'm working more with my body, just getting more into my body, because I've been very cognitive up until recently. And so, and, you know, with your book, the NLM, I'm doing that as well. And just learning from new different teachers about just getting into your body and just feeling those emotions and letting it move through, and just trying, but I'm trying to figure out how to try and just protect, I guess, my energy from like the true real suffering that's happening right now.
Mm.
I'm wondering if you have any advice or guidance or something.
Okay. I'm going to start with the biggest picture part of this, which is that level of suffering is always there, right? We're just not that aware of it, or we allow ourselves not to be aware of that. We don't follow closely what happens in the Congo, or you know, we're not walking through an Indian slum on a daily basis, or any other place where, you know, there's unbelievable heartbreak and suffering, and, you know, refugee camps and, you know, all of that. So we don't have to see it unless we're really, really involved in one slice. And so we can drown out and kind of suppress and numb to big parts of suffering that's always there, right? If you really feel where the meat you just ate came from and how, right? And all of that kind of stuff, you'd be in constant, you know, just massive panic and overwhelm. And the reason we can manage that, most of us, has to do with the fact that we do need to function, and we have very selective focus. And that's true for most people. People who don't have that selective focus often don't function well, or they channel everything into one slice that they then attack and work with and, you know, do something about. But right now, the situation is such that we can't escape the information, while usually we can escape it. We can go, well, it's not really about us, and, you know, these are different people over there in a different country, and so on and so on. Right. So because we can't escape it, as you so rightly said, we have to make much more conscious choices of filtering information, so that we can stay functional for the people who directly depend on us, and for ourselves. And so the reducing the input is one of the ways to go. When we look at how do we work with this kind of a situation, we can look at reducing input and also constant cleaning of the system, right? And the caring for the nervous system. So those are two things we can do. Reducing input means that you only get information when you need it for what you need it, and you cut out anything that you don't need in that domain, right? In the news domain, let's say. But furthermore, you can also reduce input in the sense that you, in general, look at your life and you reduce irritants and stressors in other places too. Because I sometimes talk about this in a slightly different context. And I actually wrote about that in the book. You probably recognize that the drops in a cup, which is kind of the cup being the receptacle for stress and anxiety. It's actually a good thing probably for most people to hear. So one of the ways that I used to work with people who had very strong anxiety or overwhelm or panic attacks is I would have them imagine that they have a cup, and the cup is the receptacle for the stressors. And so then every negative thought, every actual stressor, everything that came at them from, let's say, social media or news or whatever, people, situations, is like a drop in the cup. And as the cup rises, the stress level in the body increases up to when the cup runs over, which is a panic attack. But by about 75%, most of us have all the fight or flight symptoms there are without going into full-on panic attack. And so one thing one can do, of course, is to diminish the drops, like to cut down on the drops. So anything you can do that makes less drops in the cup. And then the other thing is to drain the cup. And so draining the cup can be done with the obvious things that we know about but don't think about, right? Which is eating well, sleeping enough, exercising. Nonlinear movement is a big reducer of liquid in the cup. Nature as it's possible, doing arts and crafts, listening to music, dancing, spending time connecting with people who give you a good, happy feeling, reading things or seeing things that make you feel good are all things that drain the cup. So that's kind of the two-pronged approach: is reduce drops in the cup and empty the cup often so that you stay functional.
Thank you. Thank you. That's helpful. That's a helpful way to look at it.
Yeah. And then you can see everything as equal value in the cup, meaning your catastrophic thinking, the news, and the neighbor banging at the wall are all, they create the same stressor in the body. So you can look through everything and see what you can eliminate. And you can also feel when you get to the 75% and really then stop what you're doing and emptying, and do that again and again and again.
Hi, so I'm Frederica and I'm in the south of France, and I've been isolated for months now, plenty of time. And in that time, I've actually been very much involved in news and investigation and understanding and trying to figure out what the hell was going on from different point of view. So there is like all different viewpoints on the situation. There could be the spiritual ones, the ecological ones, the shamanic ones, the scientific ones, the economical ones, and so on and so forth. So there's plenty of viewpoints around this. The medical ones, the ones from alternative medicine or more traditional medicine or scientific medicine, chemical medicine, whatever, like the whole bunch. And at some point I just goes like, oh, there's so much information, I just don't know nothing anymore, because there's just an overload of that. But what was interesting is that I noticed that everything that I was reading was not what's happening out there, but how I look at things. Oh, I fear this. Oh, this is my hope, the solidarity, wonderful. I hope this is how society will evolve, and so on and so forth. I saw my beliefs, or the things that I didn't want it to believe. I saw actually the filters through which I was reading it. But more and more that I read, I start to actually connect some dots, but also disconnect some. So some things are not adding up. And I found that I am now at a moment where I feel like a very big dissonance and distrust with the story that I feel I'm put into. I just don't, feel it's right. It's there, that's for sure, but I don't think it's right. So I don't know, my question is around that, like, how do you handle dissonance and distrust at this scale? Because it's quite a big scale.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's one question. I've got another one practice, which is nicer.
If we take it out a bit from this situation, right, and go into the general thing that you're describing, that's also always true, right? Most things that we can perceive through the lens of our experience. And I was actually talking with somebody about this who a few weeks ago, I talked with somebody who lost his wife in childbirth. And, we were talking about how when it comes to death, in this case, a very specific one person, and the friend's death. And I've experienced that with my previous teaching partner when he died. People cannot process, well, I should say that differently. When it comes to death, where it's very apparent, and this is in that same context, right? People cannot see the situation other than through their own lens, because there's an enormous charge around that particular topic. So sickness, death, economic ruin, personal freedoms restricted, unsafety, insecurity, all of those are in the death department, so to speak. And when it comes to things like that, where there's so much unknown and you can't control your own death, right? And so you can't control this situation. You can only see it through the lens or through a few lenses that you are capable of accessing. And there's many, many other lenses that are also true. And often those lenses don't actually, you can imagine it's like it's like a column, and you come in at different places, and wherever you come in, it looks different. It's the strata of different experiences and viewpoints and facts and scientific knowledge and, like you said, spiritual belief. So wherever you enter, it looks different. It's the same column. If you pull out far enough, it is one column, but depending on where you enter, it looks totally different. And it takes a lot of maturity and a lot of practice to hold differing viewpoints and differing feelings and opinions within the context of the big column. It's not easy, particularly because some of those things are opposing views, where you have to kind of walk the razor's edge between two opposing views in order to even be able to reconcile that. So that in itself is pretty much a pretty heavy duty mental and emotional gymnastics, right? So I remember when I had to deal with this situation where there was death, and this is what I advised the men I was talking to, is that you don't try and make sense, because you can't reconcile it. And it's not necessary to reconcile it. You just allow for each of those things to inform you. And as you need to make decisions based on, on what you can see and with the best information you have in that particular domain. And then if you need to consult another access point, you'll do that. But if you're trying to make sense, the cognitive dissonance will actually fry you. And in the extreme case, you can go psychotic. That would be the very extreme case. Sometimes that happens to people where they get so spun out, they can no longer function properly. And so it's best to not try and make sense, because it's not a situation that you can make sense of. Steve, did you want to add something?
From a practice point of view, I suppose I could add that confusion and dissonance, it's, in that sense, it's a sensation like any other sensation. Certainty is a state, uncertainty is a state. Certainty often is held up by a certain limitation in one's information. For instance, when a bodybuilder goes to the gym, they train the muscles. And the way they train the muscles is they make the muscles feel weak. You lift the weights until you're tired. And a bodybuilder, of course, wants to be big and strong. But if they have to feel big and strong all the time, they need to feel big and strong all the time, they won't be able to do the thing which gives them the strength, which is the actual weakness. A bodybuilder becomes a connoisseur of weakness. They're like a wine taster of weakness. Too much weakness, too much stress on the muscles. And of course, there's injury. It's not sustainable. And in their goal to become a perfectly fit person, because of their injury, they can't even be a moderately fit person. So they have to temper their objective for strength. But of course, not enough stress on the body, and they don't produce the adaptive response. They don't gain the muscle, put on the strength. It's the same, I think, when you think about knowledge. In order to acquire knowledge, you have to be willing to be ignorant, because that's the first step of learning something new. If you try to learn a new language, which is what a lot of people I've heard are doing in their isolation, they're doing time number 7 at Rosetta Stone Spanish or something. The first thing you realize is, oh, I'm terrible at this. I remember when I first started to learn Tibetan, my first lesson, it was so stressful. The first thing that we learned began to learn the alphabet. And it was so stressful, and I didn't know the alphabet of Tibetan, right? Which shouldn't have been a surprise to me. But still, a part of me was kind of surprised and indignant that I didn't know it. So I was like, wow, this is stressful on my mind. New synapses are being formed, whatever. And I had all these things in my mind. I was like, I should quit. I've got many more important things to do than this. You know, I should really be spending my energy doing something, not this, learning this language. I've got more important things. I had all this stuff, you know, well, maybe I can never do it. Maybe it's too late for me. I'm too old. I'm like Luke Skywalker in Empire Strikes Back, when he visits Yoda and Yoda says, you're too old to train as a Jedi. Maybe I'm too old to learn Tibetan, just like Luke Skywalker. But anyway, but then what I did was I, practiced a little bit, and then I started to remember 1 or 2 of the letters, and then suddenly I had this glimmer, maybe I can do it, right? But the point is, if you want to be knowledgeable about Tibetan or anything else, you have to be willing to be ignorant. That's the step, the gate you need to go through in order to acquire knowledge. But similarly, if you want to be wise, you have to be willing to be confused. And of course, the problem with knowledge is you learn something and you learn something else, and it recontextualizes all you knew before. So when you learn something new, it sweeps the rug of certainty. You have to recast your entire knowledge base based on each new piece of information you get. And sometimes that's easy to do if it's in drip drabs, but sometimes that's quite life-shattering. For instance, if you find out your partner's, run off with the circus or something like that, then suddenly it's like, whoa, an awful lot of what I thought I knew has to be recontextualized, and it's very difficult. So I think these are some of the natural functions at play. We yearn for certainty, we grasp for it, and that's good. That's a natural function of the mind, but we're not always going to get it. So there's an ability in a way to simmer in this uncertainty and the confusion and the distance like a sausage in a pan, to be able to feel the uncertainty and not necessarily automatically attempt to relieve it, to understand that sometimes you just don't know. In Zen, they call it don't know mind. If you wanted to, you could sit there as part of your meditation practice, for example, and you could have the mantra, don't know, don't know. You sit there feeling that you don't know, don't know, don't know, or maybe dissonance, 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 something like that. And you use that mantra in a sort of little bit like a masseuse. With a masseuse, you transfer the force of the stroke through the thumb, let's say, into the muscle. Similarly, you can use the mantra, don't know as a thumb, to transfer the force of your attention, the flow of your attention into the sensation of don't know. In this case, the feeling of don't know is like the muscle. The thumb is like the mantra, and the force is like your attention. So you're sort of transferring your attention by saying, don't know, don't know, don't know, don't know. If you're an emoji, you'd be like a smiley face with a question mark or something. You'd be like this. I wish I could do an emoji on myself. Sometimes that's all you can do. And then when you can make sense of things, you make the best decisions you can with the data you've got. That's all you can ever do. And for the shortfall, don't know, Don't know.
Thank you. Frederica, why don't you ask a second question?
Yeah, one is related actually to that, because we spoke about polarization, and polarization in couples sounds like a great ingredient, but polarization in society just is something that's just horrible. It sounds paradoxical to me, and I was wondering what's your view on it. Maybe it's not paradoxical at all, but it's something I haven't seen yet.
Well, well, the definition of polarity as it's used in couples sometimes, right? And different people call it different things. We call it erotic friction. But essentially what we're looking at when we talk about polarization in couples is two people being far enough from each other in opposing bodily or emotional or mental views, right? So that there's opposites and opposites attract, right? So it builds this arc of attraction. And that, or the friction, right? So often we talk about hot sex or chemistry or attraction, right? It's that thing. It's a plus and a minus, a day and a night, a hot and a cold, right? That's polarization, or polarity as it's often called. So when we talk about polarity in relationship, and this is, it's actually a great question, because people want polarity, and there are some people who live in this bizarre dogmatic world where they have split the polarity into men and women do this, or women and the feminine are bunched together and men and the masculine are bunched together. And so now we have these opposing forces that somehow attract each other, you know, or not. You know, men do this, women do this, so the masculine wants this from the feminine. So that in itself is actually creating a problem, right? The only time polarization is useful is in the realm of sexual attraction, where you have a plus and a minus, right? And there's the arc, and the arc creates the heat, and that there's the closing of the gap, the engagement, you know, the discharge, so to speak, of that tension. And then it comes to unity, hopefully. And then, you know, you kind of do it again. And so that is what polarization or polarity is. It's a meeting of the opposites for the sake of the erotic or sexual play. Now, if you try to be extremely polarized in your entire life, which is why that kind of pseudo neo-tantric lifestyle doesn't work, you're going to have massive conflict, because that is what polarization is. It's conflict. So the people who have amazing sex because they never, their views never meet, usually have really horrible relationships where they fight all the time but have great makeup sex. Right? And then you have people who have actually really lovely, good relationships that are built on resonance and sameness and connection and communication, but they don't have a lot of sexual hotness, because of course the closer you're together, the less of an arc there is. So, but it's good to know that polarity is only good in small doses when you need it for the sexual occasion. And if you have too much in your relationship, it has the exact same effect as it has out there in the world, where people get polarized into different opinions and they start fighting. And that's something that most people don't want to hear, because they want all the fancy, fun, sexual stuff, but none of the conflict that comes with it. Okay, let's see if we have any other live questions. Hello.
Hi, I just started your online course, the Pleasure Course. And I did my feet today, so that was really fun.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I'm really into it. It's the perfect thing for what's going on right now. But I was wondering if you'd be willing to give this group a little bit of homework. That's my question.
Yeah, I mean, let me confer. What kind of homework do you think this group needs?
I don't know. Maybe just some kind of a suggestion for a little project or something that they can think about or try between this week and next week, and maybe different people we could talk about how it went. Or
well, I mean, since there's many different people in many different situations, it is a bit hard to come up with one assignment. In the pleasure, we just started a course called Awakening the Pleasure Body. And in the first months, one of the things that people are doing is they're engaging with one part of their body in a very specific way. So, and that's what brought on Camille's question. Camille, I'm going to mute you because there's some background noise. One thing that everybody could do for added joy and embodiment is to find a part of the body that is usually a bit neglected, whatever that is. Maybe it's your heels, maybe it's your ears, maybe it's your scalp, the back of the knees, some part of that, and give that part a bit of extra attention. So I think that's something that everybody can do as a means of connecting back to the body and engaging with the body in some way. So that's your assignment, should you choose to accept it. Hi.
My question is around the things that I really value in terms of love language. My primary love language is physical touch, and followed very closely by quality time. And for the last 3 weeks, I've been living on my own in my flat. And I'm actually, the first week was like hell. And each week has got progressively better. And I've found that by consuming things that help me, like, I've been listening a lot to Steve's podcasts, which have been extraordinarily helpful, listening to people talking about the pandemic and giving me different perspectives. And doing nurturing things like having baths and all of the things that you teach, and the mention of the pleasure course. I'll sign up for that, because I know that will also be very, very good for me. But can you give any thoughts on how I can fulfill that a bit more? Because I'm not going out, I'm getting my shopping delivered when I can get through to Ocado, I do pop over to my sisters to pick up groceries sometimes and go and deliver them to my mum. But when I go and see my mum, she's 84 and has underlying health issues, I go, I'm not cuddling you, just in case, because we want to make sure we keep her safe, which is why my sister isn't going, because she's got a family. So Zoom calls are great and this is lovely, but it doesn't sustain that part of me that I want to hug everybody and I can't hug anybody. They're just, my natural instinct is to touch people, and I can't do anything. I can't even meet someone for a coffee or just do anything. Whilst I feel calm, and my meditation and my practice has been fantastic, I just don't know what I would have done without those. There's that bit that is just not being satisfied. So any thoughts on that would be amazing.
Yeah. Invent a vaccine very quickly. Well, I think this is where it gets really quite tough, because there isn't anything that can be done, right? I mean, you can break all the rules and infect people or get potentially infected. Lots of people are doing that because they can't actually actively withstand the need to fulfill their needs. And I mean, there's a lot of people who are doing really weird shit on text and online with each other because they can't have, you know, their usual dating, sexual hookup, whatever. You can see how the tension is rising in people because they can't do the things they can do. And the question there is price versus, you know, versus risk on one end, right? And in your case, like you said, you can't hug your mother. You don't want to hug people because it's not the thing to do right now. And that causes a great deal of suffering, which is, you know, something human to human touch is, there's nothing quite like it. And anybody who's ever been deprived of touch for any length of time knows that, right? Even if it's just a friend or something. So on one end, we have to kind of reconcile with the way things are, which, you know, is something to have to work with in your body and not very pleasant. I think I told this story once in a women's group, but and it might actually be, it is in the book. I did put it in. I once I went and volunteered at a hospice, and we had this training, you know, for the people who were helping the hospice people. And the person who trained us took these pieces of paper, and we had 10 pieces of paper, and you would write the 10 things on there that were the most important to you, the dearest things to you, things, people, activities. And then we had all our 10 cards, and then he walked us through the process of going into hospice and dying. And all along the way, we had to give up one of those cards, and then another one, and another one, right? Because you couldn't exercise anymore, and you couldn't have sex anymore, and you couldn't have, you know, and so on and so on. And then you had like one card left, and then you had to kind of give that card up as the dying process. And it was really, really brutal to feel that, right? And in a certain way, that's what we're dealing with right now. It's like that there's things are taken away for some of us more than others, of course. You know, some people have their partners in their home, and they're like, you know, I saw these memes where people are talking about, you know, wanting their partners to kill themselves, or, you know, dig themselves a grave in the yard, shallow grave in the yard. It's all kinds of memes of that kind out there. But there is some of that where we give up and we give up and we give up, and our personal freedom and our autonomy and our income and, you know, all of that. And so within that, there is very strong learning, of course, and the surrender and the letting go instead of clawing and trying, you know, like going from the sexting to the flirting to the this to the that, just to get a hit of something, where you're just prolonging the misery because it's not it, right? It's not it. And the relaxing and letting that go is not an easy thing, right? So, I don't have an answer on how, you know, to do that. The other thing, of course, on the very practical level is that you can do a lot of self-touch. And in your case, you can combine quality time with self-touch, right? And really spend a lot more time. And that's, you know, that fits in with the assignment. Also, the first months of the pleasure course has some of that, where you engage with your own body as a means of giving touch and receiving something that is very strongly, you know, of the feeling kind. You can also hug trees or animals.
I've done that. I've done that because you suggested it before. I've done that. Yeah.
But there's nothing wrong with really, really upping the time to spend on your own body, you know, and massaging your own body and caring for your own body, and, you know, doing all the things that you wouldn't necessarily do to that extent. And when you do that, really feel both the part of you that touches and the part of you that receives, and see if you can kind of feel both parts at the same time, or, you know, you can alternate, but you know, give quality time to your own body is really the best way to go. And also understand that, you know, that will only go so far, and there is a certain kind of a loss and the sadness and the yearning and all kinds of other things that, you know, that come with it. So
poem comes to mind here, and one of the good things about being stuck in your house is that you're stuck next to your books. In my case, anyway, you're not stuck next to my books. Otherwise, you'd be in my house.
But I'm stuck next to a book.
Oh yeah, I know that book.
Yes, I know.
Here's a poem that talks about that, because of course, as Michaela's saying, yearning for human connection is something that can't really be satisfied in seclusion. If it could, then you wouldn't be in seclusion. It's like the doctor says, it hurts every time I move my arm, and the doctor says, well, stop moving your arm. I feel lonely. Well, go and see somebody. Of course, now you can't. So that's precisely the problem, isn't it? But there's something in the yearning that in itself can be sweet. So this is a poem translated by Coleman Barks called Love Dogs. It's a Rumi poem, a most spacious poet. One night a man was crying, Allah, Allah. His lips grew sweet with praising, until a cynic said so. I've heard you calling out, but have you ever gotten a response? The man had no answer to that. He quit praying and fell into a confused sleep. He dreamt he saw Kidder, the guide of souls, in a thick green foliage. Why did you stop praising? Because I've never heard anything back. This longing you express is the return message. The grief you cry out from draws you toward union. Your pure sadness that wants help is the secret cup. Listen to the moan of a dog for its master. That whining is the connection. There are love dogs no one knows the names of. Give your life to be one of them.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm.
Thank you very much.
All right. Hi.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I'm going to paraphrase your question quickly so that and only bring the pieces that are useful for everyone. So essentially, Ellie sent an email up front saying that to her, the situation has had some unexpected positive benefits because she's now with her boyfriend, and it's actually caused a really good deepening, and it's really quite wonderful, and she's quite enjoying herself, and which is great. And there's, of course, a bit of a cognitive dissonance there, right? Because you are having such a good time with it. Did you want to talk about the kids as well, or do you want to just go with the general question?
Yeah, it was both. Both factors were there.
Yeah. And then the other thing was your kids are in the middle of this and getting used to somebody else living in the house, right?
Yeah.
So I think that the thing that applies to everyone is not all of this is bad, right? It is bad, but there's never just not, well, that's not true. Sometimes it's just horrible, right? Sometimes it's just abject horrible, but often the same situation can have some really, really good, interesting, aspects, some of which are kind of in hindsight, oh, that was actually good. And some of them can be really good in the midst of it, right? So there's nothing wrong with having a good experience during a difficult time. As a matter of fact, if you can really, really focus on that which is really good, it will help you create resilience. And it will help you bear the things that come after, or that, there's always a down where there's an up. So one of the really, really instrumental things in a time like this is that when you have a good moment, you must relish it, right? You have to bathe in it. You have to drink it in. You have to, just slather it all over you, so to speak, so that when the next dip comes, now or later, right? We all have the ups and downs. You have replenished and you're full and your nervous system's good and you're resilient, right? So that's really, really important. And that would be my suggestion for you, is to really, 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 relish in it. And then as far as your kids go, they're old enough that if there's an issue, they will let you know. And also you are sensitive enough that you can feel if something has to happen. It's probably better for them to feel that there's some real joy and positive experience in the house and in you than the added inconvenience of having an extra person in the house. And it also sounds like they're at an age where they care less and less about that anyway.
Yeah, they don't want to hang out with me that much.
Yeah, of course not. No teenager in their right mind ever has.
And the other part of my question, if you're happy for me to bring it in, was also that sort of generic thing of how much good can you tolerate?
Well,
I'm asking.
That's a whole other thing. As a matter of fact, that is so much a thing that the entire 6 months of the pleasure course is all about expanding the pleasure threshold, because we have a cap, right? We have a cap on goodness. Where, and it's kind of interesting because we always want to think that we kind of cap and shut off and maybe even dissociate when things are really bad. But often we have even less of a tolerance for the goodness than for the bad stuff. And some of that has to do with the fact that we don't have muscle, right? So some of it has to do with trauma and bad experiences and, programming, certainly in the realm of goodness. And when I talk about pleasure in the online course, it's not just physical pleasure, it's aliveness, it's vitality, it's creativity, and all of that. Right? We often don't have any muscle around that or practice around really allowing that in. And then if there's some societal or programming or traumatic cap on top of that, we can't allow ourselves to have much of it. And certainly a lot of people think that if it's really good stuff happens and they wallow in it, it must go bad, right? And so, there's this whole thing, there's I think it was Romanian or something, that the farmers never talk about their harvests. And if you say something good, you have to afterwards say bad harvest, because the gods can't hear that it was good, because then they will come and punish you. It's as old, it's archetypal. So expanding your goodness threshold has to be done in increments where you are essentially doing the thing that I talked about. You allow yourself to have it. Yeah. You stop and you feel it and you allow it and you massage it into your body, so that the next time you can have it easier. You have to build that muscle. And when you notice that it's so good that you pop out, you'll have to kind of bring yourself back in. And that's also a matter of staying embodied, because a lot of people, when it gets really good, both in the physical pleasure department and in the emotional aliveness, goodness department, they pop out. In the worst case scenario, they destroy it, right? Yeah. They make it go away. So the way you do it is you stay there, you let yourself have it as fully as you can, then you kind of pull out, then you'll go back in, and you kind of train as you would train for a workout. It's a goodness workout.
It's a good workout. I'll go with that.
Yes.
May I add something?
Yeah.
One of the things about feeling good things is that when you really feel a good thing, one of the things you're going to feel straight away is its transience, how temporary it is. Sometimes there's a saying, you know, I don't remember the exact saying, but it goes along the lines of, if you don't get your hopes up, you can never be disappointed. When we really taste how sweet and wonderful something is, let's say it's a relationship or a situation, well, it's going to pass. Eventually it will change at the very least, and it may even get worse or disappear when one or both of you dies or whatever happens, right? And it's also true, I think, when one has proximity to death or has proximity to suffering and difficulty, that it can make the simple things sweet. These things can be polarized. So don't be surprised if in feeling the sweetness of the lovely thing that you have, you also at the same time feel the pain or the melancholy kind of sadness of its inevitable loss. And I think appreciation, real appreciation, has both of those sides. Real appreciation has both the reveling in the positive and the wonderful, whilst at the same time, this is why one appreciates it in a way, recognizing that there's no guarantee of its continuation. In fact, it's inevitably going to pass away. So that's why one sort of seizes it like a live jazz performance that only happens once. They're making it up as they go along, not to be repeated. There's something life has got that kind of live performance feeling to it. So to really feel the wonderful, you also have to feel the other side as well. It seems to come together.
I like that. Can I add something to that quickly?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think the situation itself has created that go for it feeling of, if not now, when? Because it's not about kind of making cognitive decisions. It's just, we're in a strange moment. Go for the good things.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, everyone. We'll do this again very soon. See you all very soon.